It happened so fast, I didn't even have time to feel angry. One moment I was sitting at my daughter Emily's dining table trying to keep the peace. And the next, my son-in-law Derek stood up and threw a full glass of ice water straight into my face. No warning, no apology, just silence. I could hear my own breathing, feel the water dripping down my blouse while Emily sat frozen, not saying a word. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply reached for a napkin, wiped my face, and stood up slowly. Then I looked Derek in the eyes and said, "Tomorrow morning, I'll be giving you something you should have gotten a long time ago." And I walked out. If that moment shocked you, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe respect should never be optional, please like and subscribe. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. My name is Sara Pierce, and for most of my life, I believed that if you loved your family enough, if you stayed patient and calm and steady, things would find their way back to right. I was a school counselor for over 30 years in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent my days helping children untangle emotions they didn't yet have words for: fear, anger, confusion, loneliness. I used to tell them that feelings don't make you weak. Silence does. And for a long time, I thought I had learned that lesson well. Then my husband Robert passed away 8 years ago, and everything I understood about strength shifted. Robert had been the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He believed in quiet preparation, in writing things down, in thinking 3 steps ahead. Peace, he used to tell me, isn't something you keep by avoiding conflict. It's something you protect by knowing when to stand firm. After he died, it was just me and my daughter Emily. Emily was my whole heart. She was the kind of child who used to leave little notes in my purse before school. "You're going to do great today, Mom." She grew into a woman who was thoughtful, sharp, and independent. She worked in marketing, had her own apartment by 25, and carried herself with a confidence that made me proud every single day. So when she met Derek Carter, I wanted to believe she had chosen well. At first, Derek was exactly the kind of man people admire. He dressed well, spoke smoothly, always knew the right thing to say in a room full of strangers. He worked in residential development and talked about projects, timelines, investments, things that sounded solid and ambitious. When he first came over for dinner, he brought wine, complimented my cooking, and called me ma'am with a smile that seemed respectful. But I've spent a lifetime watching people closely, and there were small things, little things, the kind most people would ignore. He interrupted Emily often, not harshly, not rudely, but just enough that her sentences never quite finished the way she intended. If someone asked her a question, he would answer first, then look at her as if inviting agreement rather than giving her space to speak. He had a way of laughing lightly when she disagreed, like her opinion was something sweet but slightly misguided. Once during one of those early dinners, Emily was telling me about a campaign she was proud of, something she had led at work. Derek smiled, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Yeah, she gets excited about these things. I keep her grounded." It sounded harmless. But Emily's voice got a little quieter after that. I noticed. I just didn't say anything, because that's what mothers do sometimes when they're afraid of pushing too hard. We convince ourselves we're respecting boundaries when really we're avoiding discomfort. Their relationship moved quickly. Within a year, they were engaged. The wedding was beautiful, small, elegant, held in a garden just outside the city. Emily looked radiant. Derek looked proud. Everyone said they were perfect together, and I told myself that maybe I had imagined those little moments. Maybe I was just being protective. Maybe this was what compromise looked like in a marriage. For a while, things seemed fine. They bought a house together in a quiet neighborhood. Emily called me regularly, came by for Sunday lunches, and still had that brightness in her voice. But slowly, so slowly, I almost missed it. Things began to change. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter. There were more cancellations, more, "We're busy this weekend, Mom." More moments where her voice sounded tired, like she was choosing her words carefully. When I asked how things were going, she would smile and say, "We're good. Just a lot going on." Derek, on the other hand, seemed more present than ever, but only in certain ways. He started taking over conversations when I visited. He would talk about their plans, their finances, their future, always using we, but somehow making it clear that he was the one steering everything. I remember one afternoon standing in their kitchen while Emily was at work. Derek had invited me over early, said he wanted to go over a few things. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and said, "Emily has a tendency to worry unnecessarily. I try to keep things streamlined." Streamlined. That was the word he used. I smiled politely and asked what he meant. "Decisions," he said. "Finances, long-term planning. She trusts me to handle that stuff." There was something about the way he said it, not proud, not grateful, but entitled. Like trust wasn't something he earned. It was something he assumed. I nodded, but a small knot formed in my chest. Still, I said nothing. Because Emily seemed okay. Until she wasn't. A year into their marriage, she got pregnant. I will never forget the way her voice sounded when she told me, soft, hopeful, a little scared. I cried. She laughed. For a brief moment, everything felt like it was opening into something beautiful again. And then just 12 weeks later, she lost the baby. The grief hit her hard. Harder than I had ever seen her struggle with anything. She stopped calling for a while. When I did hear from her, her voice was fragile, like it might crack if she spoke too long. I offered to come over to stay with her to help, but Derek said she needed space to heal. Space. That word again. When I finally saw her, she looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. Like she was folding inward. Derek was attentive in those early days after the loss, at least on the surface. He made sure she took time off work. He handled the household. He spoke for her more than ever. And that's when something shifted. Because grief makes people vulnerable, and vulnerable people are easier to control. I started noticing how often he corrected her, how he framed her emotions as something excessive, how he would say things like, "You're overthinking again," or "Let me handle it." It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet, consistent, eroding. And somewhere in the middle of all that, something else began to surface. Money. It started with casual mentions. "Things are a little tight right now. Just temporary. Investments take time to pay off." But the way Derek talked about money never quite matched the way they lived. They still went out to nice dinners, still took short trips, still maintained an image of comfort. I remember sitting at their dining table one evening watching him scroll through something on his phone while Emily cleared the plates. He sighed and said almost to himself, "Timing is everything in this business." I asked what he meant. He smiled, set his phone down and said, "Just a couple deals that haven't closed yet. Nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about. I had heard that phrase before from parents trying to hide things from their children, from couples trying to convince themselves things were fine. And for the first time, I felt something I couldn't ignore anymore. Not just concern, not just unease, but a quiet, growing certainty. That something in my daughter's life was not what it appeared to be, and that whatever Derek was building, it wasn't nearly as stable as he wanted us to believe. If there's one thing I learned in my years as a counselor, it's this change rarely announces itself. It slips in quietly. One missed call, one canceled visit, one small shift in tone. And before you realize it, the person you love is standing right in front of you, but somehow feels far away. That's what happened with Emily. At first, I told myself she was just busy. Work had always been demanding for her, and marriage comes with its own adjustments. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who questioned every little change. So when she canceled our usual Sunday lunches 3 weeks in a row, I said nothing. When her texts became shorter, "I'm okay, Mom. Just tired." I told myself to give her space. When she stopped calling altogether for nearly 10 days, I picked up my phone more than once, and then put it back down again, because I didn't want to push her away. Looking back now, I see how dangerous that silence was. The first time I truly noticed something was wrong, I was standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store. It sounds like such an ordinary place for something important to happen, doesn't it? But that's how life works sometimes. I heard someone call my name Sara, and when I turned around I saw Emily. She looked surprised to see me, but not in a happy way. More like she had been caught somewhere she wasn't expecting. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "I didn't know you were out today." She nodded quickly, glancing down at the basket in her hands. "I just needed to grab a few things." Her voice was polite. "Careful." Not the easy, warm voice I was used to. I stepped closer, studying her face. There were faint shadows under her eyes, and her shoulders seemed slightly hunched, like she was bracing for something. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she smiled, too quickly, too neatly. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a lot going on." That phrase again. A lot going on. I nodded, but something inside me tightened. We stood there for a moment, neither of us quite sure how to move the conversation forward. It felt unnatural, like we were strangers trying to remember a script we used to know by heart. Then, without thinking, I reached out and touched her arm. "Emily," I said softly, "you know, you can tell me if something's wrong, right?" Her eyes flickered. For just a second, I saw it. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of saying too much. And then it was gone. "I know," she said quickly. It's nothing serious. Derek's dealing with some stuff at work. It's been stressful, that's all." "Derek." "Of course." I nodded slowly. "What kind of stuff?" She shifted her weight, tightening her grip on the basket. "Just projects. Delays. You know how it is." "No, I thought." I didn't, because when Robert had stress at work, he didn't let it spill into every corner of our home. He didn't make me feel like I had to measure every word before I spoke. But I didn't say that. Instead, I gave her a small smile and said, "Well, if you need anything at all, you know I'm here." She nodded again, relief flashing across her face. "Thanks, Mom." And then she left. Just like that. I stood there in the middle of that aisle, surrounded by boxes of cereal, feeling like I had just watched something important slip through my fingers. After that day, I started paying closer attention. Not in a confrontational way, just observing, listening, watching the spaces between things. And what I saw began to trouble me more than I wanted to admit. Emily stopped talking about her work entirely. That was the first big shift. She used to tell me everything, her ideas, her frustrations, her little victories. Now when I asked how things were going, she would shrug and say, "It's fine. Just fine." As if her world had been reduced to something that didn't deserve detail. Then there were the little comments Derek would make when I was around. Subtle. Always subtle. I told her we should cut back on unnecessary expenses. She gets emotional about things that aren't really a big deal. I'm just trying to make sure we're thinking long term. On their own, those statements sounded reasonable, responsible even. But the pattern told a different story. Because every time he said something like that, Emily would go quiet. Not defensive, not argumentative, just quiet. As if she had learned that speaking up wasn't worth the effort. One evening, I invited them over for dinner, hoping to create a space where things might feel normal again. Emily arrived first. She hugged me tightly at the door, holding on just a second longer than usual. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. I pulled back and looked at her. "You look tired." She laughed lightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just a long week." I wanted to ask more. I wanted to press. But before I could, Derek walked in behind her, his presence filling the room in a way that felt heavy. "Smells great in here, Sara," he said, flashing that practiced smile. "Thank you," I replied. We sat down to eat, and for a while, everything seemed almost normal. Conversation flowed. Laughter came, though it felt slightly forced at times. And then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, Derek leaned back in his chair and said something that made my stomach drop. "We've been thinking about tightening things up financially," he said casually. I looked at Emily. She was staring down at her plate. "Tightening things up," I repeated. "Yeah," Derek said. "Just being smarter about money. You know how it is, markets shift, opportunities come and go." He spoke like a man giving a presentation. Smooth. Controlled. I nodded slowly. "Of course. That makes sense." There was a pause. Then he added almost as an afterthought. "We might need a little flexibility for a while." Flexibility. Another carefully chosen word? I set my fork down. "What kind of flexibility?" He smiled again, but this time there was something behind it. Something calculating. "Nothing major," he said. "Just temporary support until a few things close." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at Emily, really looked at her. And this time she didn't hide it fast enough. There it was again. That flicker, that quiet, trapped expression. As if she was standing in a room with no doors waiting for someone else to decide when she could leave. In that moment, I understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't just about stress, or business, or temporary setbacks. This was about control. And the more I watched, the more I realized Derek wasn't just managing their finances. He was managing her. And whatever was happening behind closed doors, it was already deeper than I had allowed myself to believe. The first time Derek asked me for money, he didn't call it that. He called it a short-term bridge. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Emily invited me over for coffee. She sounded almost cheerful on the phone, which felt like a small victory after weeks of distance. I brought a lemon loaf, her favorite, and tried not to read too much into the sudden warmth. When I arrived, Derek was already home. That alone told me something. He usually worked long hours, or at least that's what he said. But there he was, sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open and a neat stack of papers beside him like he had been waiting. "Sara," he said with a smile, standing up to greet me. "Perfect timing." I returned the smile, but something inside me stayed cautious. We sat down. Emily poured coffee, her hands moving quickly, almost mechanically. She didn't meet my eyes. Derek folded his hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. "I'll get straight to the point," he said. "We're in the middle of closing a deal. It's solid, really solid, but the timing's a little tight." I listened without interrupting. He continued. "We just need a short-term bridge, something to cover a gap until everything clears." There it was again. that polished language. I glanced at Emily. She kept stirring her coffee even though there was nothing left to dissolve. How much, I asked calmly. Derek named a number. It wasn't small, but it also wasn't something I couldn't manage. Still, I didn't answer right away. What exactly is the money for, I asked. He smiled as if he had expected the question. Just to keep things moving, permits, final approvals, that kind of thing. Completely standard. Standard. Another word designed to make something sound harmless. I nodded slowly. And when would it be paid back? Within 60 days, he said without hesitation. 90 at the absolute latest. I turned to Emily. She finally looked up, her expression soft but strained. It's just temporary, Mom, she said quietly. We wouldn't ask if we didn't need it. Those words landed heavier than anything Derek had said, because they weren't really hers. They sounded rehearsed. Still, she was my daughter, and she was asking. So I said yes. I told myself it was a one-time thing. A gesture of support during a difficult moment. I transferred the money the next morning. Derek sent a brief message thanking me, efficient, polite, almost businesslike. Emily called that evening. Thank you, Mom, she said. It really helps. I could hear relief in her voice, and for a moment I believed I had done the right thing, but 60 days came and went. Then 90. No repayment. No mention of it either. When I finally brought it up gently during a phone call, Emily hesitated. It's just taking a little longer than expected, she said. But it's coming. Derek said everything's still on track. Everything's still on track. I repeated the phrase silently after we hung up. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. A few weeks later, Derek called me directly. That was new. Sara, he said, his tone warm, confident. I wanted to update you. I listened. The deal's almost finalized, he continued. But we've run into a small delay on the back end. Nothing serious, just paperwork. Paperwork. There's an opportunity here to strengthen the position, he added. But we need a little more flexibility. I didn't respond immediately. How much more, I asked. He gave me another number, larger this time. I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, not anger, just awareness. Derek, I said carefully. I thought the original amount would cover everything until closing. It would have, he said smoothly. But in this business, you have to adapt. This is actually a good sign. It means the project is gaining traction. He made it sound like growth, like progress, like something positive. I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing Robert. He used to say that when explanations get more complicated, the truth is usually getting further away. I opened my eyes again. And Emily, I asked, is she comfortable with this? There was a brief pause. She trusts me, he said. That wasn't what I had asked. I swallowed slowly. I'll think about it, I replied. Of course, he said. Take your time. But the next morning, Emily called. Her voice was tight. Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, she said quickly, but this could really help us stabilize things. Stabilize. Another carefully chosen word. Emily, I said gently. What's really going on? There was silence on the other end. Then softly. It's just been stressful, Mom. Derek's under a lot of pressure. I waited, but she didn't say anything else. And once again I said yes. I told myself it was for her, not for him. That distinction mattered to me at the time. Looking back now, I'm not sure it did. After the second transfer, I did something I hadn't done the first time. I wrote everything down. The date, the amount, the reason given, even the exact phrases Derek had used. Not because I was planning anything, but because Robert's voice echoed in my mind. When money changes the tone of a relationship, you keep records. So I did, quietly, carefully, without telling anyone. Weeks passed, then months. The repayments never came. But the requests did, each one framed differently, each one justified with new explanations. And each time something in Derek's tone shifted, he became less careful, less polite, more expectant. As if my help wasn't generosity anymore. It was part of the system. One evening during another visit, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Derek was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone while Emily stood at the sink washing dishes. He didn't look up as he spoke. "We should probably talk about restructuring things," he said. I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Just making everything more efficient," he replied. "Cleaner, easier to manage long term." I glanced at Emily, her shoulders tensed. "What exactly would that involve?" I asked. He finally looked up, meeting my eyes with a calm, measured expression. "Nothing complicated," he said. "Just aligning resources." Aligning resources. That was the moment I realized something important. Derek didn't see me as family. He saw me as an asset. Something to be managed, leveraged, optimized. I forced a small smile. I'd need to understand that better before making any decisions. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We'll go over it soon." But we didn't. Instead, the requests paused. Not stopped. Paused. Like he was waiting for the right moment, and during that time I kept writing things down. Every message, every call, every detail that didn't quite make sense. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse. I simply observed. Because something in me had shifted. The part of me that once wanted to believe everything was fine, it was gone. Replaced by something quieter, stronger, more certain. And though I couldn't yet see the full picture, I knew this much for sure: whatever Derek was building, it wasn't just unstable. It was built on something he didn't want me to see. And the more he asked, the more I understood. He wasn't just asking for help anymore. He was testing how far I would go. The night everything broke wasn't loud at first. It began the way so many uncomfortable evenings do, with forced smiles, careful conversation, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, things would feel normal again. Emily had called me 2 days earlier. "Mom, would you come over for dinner on Friday?" she asked. Her voice sounded softer than usual. Not cheerful, but hopeful. Like she was trying to create something that hadn't been there in a while. Of course I said. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask who else would be there. I simply said yes. When I arrived, the house looked beautiful. Candles lit the dining table. The good plates were out, the ones Emily used to save for special occasions. For a moment, standing in the doorway, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Maybe this was a reset. Maybe things were turning. Emily greeted me with a hug that lingered just a little longer than usual. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. Derek appeared from the kitchen a moment later, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Sara," he said with that familiar polished smile. "You look great." "Thank you," I said evenly. Dinner began smoothly. We talked about small things, weather work, a new restaurant that had opened downtown. Emily laughed a few times, and each time she did, I found myself watching her closely, trying to see if the laughter reached her eyes. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. Derek poured wine, kept the conversation moving, played the role of the attentive host with practiced ease. But underneath it all, there was something else. A tension that didn't belong in a room like that. It sat just beneath the surface like a crack in glass you can't unsee once you notice it. Halfway through the meal, Derek leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass slowly. "You know," he said, his tone casual, almost conversational. "I've been thinking about something." I kept my expression neutral. "What's that?" He glanced at Emily briefly, then back at me. "About support," he said. The word landed heavily. I set my fork down. "What about it?" He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think sometimes support can get complicated." I felt my chest tighten. Complicated how? He tilted his head, studying me like he was choosing his next move carefully. "Like when it starts coming with expectations," he said. I blinked slowly. "Expectations," I repeated. Emily shifted in her seat. "Derek." She started, but he lifted a hand slightly, cutting her off without even looking at her. "I'm just saying," he continued, his voice still calm. "It's important to keep things clean, simple, not transactional." I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I said very quietly, "Are you suggesting that my help has been anything other than that?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his wine. "I think intentions matter," he said, "and sometimes people don't realize how their involvement can influence things." There it was. Not an accusation, but close enough. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Clarity. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Every time you've asked for help, I've given it freely. Without conditions. Without interference." He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a point in a debate. "Sure," he said, "but that doesn't mean it doesn't create a dynamic." Emily's fork clattered softly against her plate. "Can we not do this tonight?" she said, her voice tight. But Derek wasn't finished. "I just think," he continued, "that if we're going to move forward, we need to establish some boundaries." Boundaries? I almost smiled at that. "Boundaries go both ways," I replied, his eyes sharpened slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "that if you're uncomfortable receiving support, you're always free to stop asking for it." The air in the room shifted instantly. Emily looked between us, her face pale. Derek set his glass down slowly. "That's not what I said," he replied. "No," I said softly, "but it's what you're implying." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Derek let out a short, humorless laugh. "You know what the problem is," he said. I didn't answer. He leaned forward, his expression changing, subtle but unmistakable. "You still think you have a say here," he said. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Deliberate. Emily's eyes widened. "Derek, stop." But he didn't. "You come into our house," he continued, his voice tightening, "and you act like you're part of every decision, like this is still your life to manage." I felt the sting of that, but I didn't react. Not the way he expected. "This is my daughter's life," I said quietly, "and I will always care about her well-being." He smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. "That's exactly what I mean," he said. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emily's hands trembled slightly in her lap. "Derek," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. But something had already snapped. Not loudly, not violently, just completely. He stood up so suddenly his chair scraped sharply against the floor. "Let's be honest," he said, his voice rising now. "This isn't about concern, it's about control." I stayed seated. "Control," I repeated. "Yes," he said. You think because you've helped us financially, you get to insert yourself into everything. Question everything. Judge everything. That's not true, Emily said quickly. But he wasn't listening anymore. And I'm tired of it, he added. Then before I could respond, before Emily could move, he reached for the glass in front of him, and in one swift motion he threw it. The cold water hit my face, soaking into my hair, my blouse dripping down onto the table. For a second, the world went completely still. I could hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, my own heartbeat. Emily gasped, "Oh my God. Derek, what are you doing?" But I didn't look at her. I didn't look at him either. Not right away. I reached slowly for my napkin, folded it once, then gently pressed it against my cheek, wiping away the water. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't falter. Because in that moment, something inside me settled. All the doubt, all the hesitation, all the questions I had been quietly holding, they were gone, replaced by something clear, final. I placed the napkin back on the table. Then I stood up. Only then did I look at Derek. Really, look at him. And what I saw wasn't power. It wasn't control. It was desperation. Messy, exposed, ugly. I met his eyes and said calmly, "Tomorrow morning, Derek, I'll be giving you something you should have received a long time ago." He frowned, caught off guard. "What does that mean?" he demanded. But I didn't answer. I turned to Emily. For a moment our eyes met, hers filled with shock, with guilt, with something deeper she hadn't yet found the courage to name. I softened my expression just slightly. Then I picked up my purse and I walked out. Not in anger, not in defeat, but with a quiet certainty that the next day, everything was going to change. I don't remember the drive home in detail. I remember the streetlights, how they blurred into long streaks across my windshield. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. I remember the silence, but mostly I remember the feeling. Not anger, not even humiliation. Clarity. That was the word that settled over me like something steady and immovable. Because what Derek did that night didn't just cross a line, it revealed something that had been there all along. And once you see something clearly, you can't pretend you don't anymore. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the entryway, still wearing the damp blouse, listening to the quiet of the house that had once been full of my husband's laughter. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The ache, the exhaustion, the deep, sharp disappointment that my daughter had sat there frozen while someone disrespected me in her own home. That part hurt more than the water ever could. But I didn't stay in that feeling long, because something else was already taking shape. Something Robert had taught me years ago in moments when life didn't go the way we expected. When things fall apart, he used to say, "You don't react. You prepare." So that's what I did. I walked into the living room, turned on the lamp beside the sofa, and set my purse down carefully. Then I went to the hallway cabinet, the one with the small brass key I kept hidden behind a framed photo. My hands were steady as I unlocked the drawer. Inside was a folder, thick, organized, quietly waiting. I carried it to the dining table and sat down. For a moment, I just looked at it. Because everything I had chosen not to confront, every doubt I had pushed aside, every uneasy feeling I had explained away, was sitting right there in front of me. And now there was no reason to look away. I opened it. The first section held copies of every check I had written to Emily and Derek. Dates, amounts, notes in the margins. The second section contained printed bank transfers, each one highlighted and labeled. The third section my own edition held, written summaries of conversations. Not transcripts, just enough detail to remember what was said. The words Derek used. The way Emily sounded. The gaps between explanation and reality. I flipped through the pages slowly, methodically. Not with anger, with focus. Because this wasn't about proving something to myself anymore. It was about understanding exactly what I was dealing with. And the more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Each request had followed the same structure. Urgency, reassurance, delay. Then another request. Different words. Same outcome. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. And that's when something else surfaced in my mind. A memory I had tried to dismiss before. 2 weeks earlier, I had been leaving the grocery store parking lot when I saw Derek standing near the far end of the lot talking to a man I didn't recognize. I hadn't meant to overhear anything, but as I walked past, I caught a fragment of his voice, sharp, tense, in a way I had never heard before. We need to move things before anyone starts asking questions. I had slowed slightly instinctively. The other man had said something too low for me to catch. Then Derek again, quieter this time, but urgent. I'm telling you, if this gets flagged, it's going to be a problem. At the time, I told myself it was none of my business, that I didn't have the full context, that I shouldn't jump to conclusions. So I kept walking, and I didn't mention it to anyone. But now, sitting there at my table with that folder open in front of me, I felt that moment differently. Not as a passing curiosity, but as a piece of something larger, something I had been too willing to ignore. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the pieces settle. Then I reached for my phone. There was only one person I trusted to look at this without emotion clouding judgment. Linda Matthews. We had met 20 years ago at a school fundraiser. She was already a CPA. Then sharp, direct, the kind of woman who didn't waste time on unnecessary words. Over the years, she had become more than a friend. She was someone who saw things clearly even when others didn't want to. I hadn't called her in a while, but something told me this was the moment. She picked up on the third ring. "Sarah," she said, surprised. "Everything okay?" I hesitated for just a second. Then I said, "No. I don't think it is." There was a pause on the line. "Tell me," she said. So I did. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. I told her about the money, the repeated requests, the lack of repayment, the language Derek used, and finally the incident at dinner. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't soften it either. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Then Linda exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "First, I need you to listen to me very carefully." I straightened slightly in my chair. "This is not just a family issue," she continued. "What you're describing, especially the pattern of financial requests and inconsistencies, it raises questions. Serious ones." My grip tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that involve intent," she said. "And possibly misrepresentation." The words settled heavily in the air between us. I swallowed. "You think he's lying?" "I think," she said carefully, "that there are enough irregularities here to warrant a closer look. And I think you were very smart to keep records." For the first time that night, I felt something shift. Not fear, validation. "I didn't plan this," I said quietly. "I just started writing things down." "Good," she replied, "because now we have something to work with." We spoke for another 20 minutes. She asked precise questions, amounts, dates, timelines. I answered as clearly as I could. By the end of the call, we had a plan. "Bring everything to me tomorrow," she said. "Every document, every note. We're going to go through it line by line." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Okay. And, Sara," she added, "yes. Whatever you do, don't confront him yet." I thought about Derek's face when the water hit me, about the look in his eyes, about the way Emily had frozen. "I won't," I said, because I understood something now. This wasn't a moment for reaction. It was a moment for precision, for truth, for timing. I ended the call and sat there for a while longer, the folder still open in front of me. Then slowly I began organizing it, adding tabs, rewriting notes more clearly, putting everything in order. Not because I was angry, but because I was preparing. And as I worked, one thought kept returning to me over and over again. Tomorrow morning. That's what I had told him. Tomorrow morning, I would give him something he should have received a long time ago. At the time, even I hadn't fully known what that meant. But now I did. Because what Derek had done that night wasn't just disrespect. It was a mistake. A final one. And by the time I finished organizing that folder, I understood something with absolute certainty. The envelope I was going to hand him wouldn't just change the conversation, it would change everything. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had slept well, I hadn't, but because my mind refused to stay still any longer. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from finally seeing something clearly after months, maybe years of trying not to. That's the kind I was carrying. I made myself a cup of coffee, though I barely tasted it, and sat at the kitchen table with the folder in front of me. Everything was organized now, labeled, dated, structured in a way that even Robert would have approved of. For the first time since the night before, I allowed myself to feel something beyond clarity. Fear. Not for me. For Emily. Because whatever Linda was going to confirm, it was going to affect her life far more than mine. At exactly 8 o'clock, I gathered the folder, placed it carefully into a leather tote, and drove across town to Linda's house. She was already waiting when I arrived. That was Linda, always prepared. She opened the door before I even knocked, her expression serious but steady. "Come in," she said. We didn't waste time with small talk. She led me straight to her dining table, where she had already laid out a notepad, a calculator, and her laptop. It looked less like a home and more like a quiet command center. "Let's see what we've got," she said. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. For the next 2 hours, we worked in silence, broken only by questions. Linda didn't react emotionally. She didn't speculate. She analyzed. Every check I had written, she logged. Every transfer she traced. Every note I had made, she cross-referenced against timelines. At one point, she leaned back slightly, narrowing her eyes at the screen. That single sound tightened something in my chest. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she clicked through a few more pages, typed something into a search bar, then pulled up a document. "Look at this," she said, turning the laptop toward me. I leaned forward. It was a business registration. The name meant nothing to me at first. A small LLC, recently formed. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. I shook my head. "No." She tapped the screen. "Look at the listed manager." I read the name. Derek Carter. A cold, slow understanding began to spread through me. "This is his?" I asked. "Looks like it," she said, "and based on the timing, it lines up with when he started asking you for money." I swallowed. "What kind of company is it?" She scrolled further. That's the problem, she said. It's vague. General consulting development services. Nothing specific. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. What does that mean? It means, she said calmly, it could be legitimate. Or it could be a vehicle. A vehicle for what? She met my eyes. Moving money in ways that aren't entirely transparent. The room felt suddenly smaller. I leaned back in my chair trying to process. But he said the money was for permits, approvals, closing costs. Linda gave a small, almost sympathetic look. He said a lot of things. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said. So what are we looking at here? Mismanagement, bad business decisions. She shook her head slightly. It's more than that. She turned the laptop back toward herself and pulled up another document. This, she said, is where it gets concerning. I leaned forward again. It was a scanned form, legal-looking. My eyes moved across the page until they stopped on a name. Emily Carter? My stomach dropped. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Linda pointed to the header. Refinancing agreement, she said. Or at least part of one. I blinked. That doesn't make sense. They never mentioned refinancing anything. Exactly, she said. My eyes moved to the signature line. There it was. Emily's name. Her handwriting. Or something that looked very close to it. She signed this, I asked. Linda didn't answer immediately. Instead, she zoomed in slightly on the signature. It appears that way, she said carefully, but that doesn't necessarily mean she understood what she was signing. A chill ran through me. You think he pressured her? I think, Linda said slowly, that it's possible she was presented with documents under the assumption they were something else, or that she didn't fully grasp the implications. I sat back, my mind racing. Emily had always been careful, smart. She wouldn't just sign something like that without understanding it. Would she? Unless she trusted him completely. Unless he framed it in a way that made it seem routine, necessary, harmless. I closed my eyes for a moment, and suddenly I could hear her voice again from the grocery store. Derek's dealing with some stuff at work. He's under a lot of pressure. He handles that kind of thing. Each sentence now felt heavier, loaded, not just with stress, but with dependence. I opened my eyes again. How bad is this? I asked. Linda leaned forward, folding her hands. Right now, she said, we don't have enough to say it's criminal, but we do have enough to say it's deceptive. The word landed like a stone. Deceptive. And if this continues, I pressed. Her expression didn't change. Then it could become something much more serious. I nodded slowly. What about the money I gave them? I asked. Can that be traced? She gave a small, firm nod. Yes. And based on what I'm seeing, at least some of it appears to have passed through this company. My chest tightened. So he's not using it for what he said. No, she said plainly. He's not. The certainty in her voice left no room for doubt. I stared down at the folder in front of me. All those notes, all those details, every uneasy feeling I had tried to push aside. They weren't imagination. They were warning signs. And I had finally listened. What do I do? I asked quietly. Linda didn't hesitate. You stop giving him money, she said. Immediately. I nodded. That part's easy. She held my gaze. The harder part is deciding what comes next. I knew what she meant. This wasn't just about finances anymore. This was about Emily, her safety, her future. her understanding of what was happening in her own life. "I need to talk to her," I said. Linda shook her head gently. "Not yet." I frowned. "Why not?" "Because right now," she said, "you have information she may not be ready to hear, and if you approach this the wrong way, she might shut down, or worse, defend him." The thought made my stomach turn. "But she needs to know I said." "She does," Linda agreed, "but timing matters." I sat in silence for a moment, letting that sink in. Timing. That word again. Robert used to say the same thing. Then Linda added something that shifted everything. "And Sara," she said, her voice softer, "now you need to protect yourself too." I looked up at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, "if he's willing to manipulate finances this way and speak to you the way he did last night, you need to assume he won't stop unless something forces him to." A slow, steady realization settled over me. This wasn't going to resolve itself. It wasn't going to fade away with time or patience. It needed an ending. A clear one. I nodded. "Okay," I said. "So what do we do?" Linda reached for her notepad and turned to a fresh page. "We start by organizing this into something actionable," she said. "Something that can't be ignored." I watched as she began outlining steps: documentation, legal consultation, formal communication. Each one precise, deliberate, measured. And as she spoke, I felt that same clarity from the night before return. Stronger now, sharper. Because this wasn't just about understanding what Derek had done, it was about deciding what I was going to do about it. When we finished, Linda closed the notebook and looked at me. "You're in a position of strength," she said. "You have records, you have documentation, and you haven't acted emotionally." I gave a small, humorless smile. "That's not what it feels like." She leaned forward slightly. "Strength rarely feels like strength in the moment," she said. "It feels like responsibility." I let that settle. Then I gathered the folder, sliding it back into my tote. As I stood up, one thought moved clearly through my mind. Yesterday, Derek thought he had humiliated me. He thought he had silenced me. But what he had really done was give me the final reason to stop hesitating. Because now I understood exactly what I was dealing with. And more importantly, what needed to happen next. The envelope I had promised him, it wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming something real, something structured, something he wouldn't be able to dismiss, ignore, or twist. And as I walked out of Linda's house, I realized something with absolute certainty. By the time I handed it to him, he wasn't going to be smiling anymore. I didn't go home right away after leaving Linda's house. Instead, I sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people move in and out of a nearby cafe as if the world were still simple. Because for them, it probably was. But for me, something had shifted permanently. The pieces Linda had laid out so clearly weren't just numbers or documents. They were proof of something I had been trying not to name. Derek wasn't just careless. He wasn't just struggling. He was deceptive. And the most dangerous part wasn't what he had done to me. It was what he might already be doing to Emily. I took a slow breath, reached for my phone, and stared at her name on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. Linda's words echoed in my mind. Timing matters. She was right. If I came at this too directly, too forcefully, Emily might shut down. Worse, she might defend him. Not because she didn't love me, but because that's what people do when they've been conditioned to doubt their own instincts. So I didn't call. I sent a message instead. "Can we meet for coffee this afternoon?" Just the two of us. It took almost 15 minutes for her to reply. "Okay." Just that. No warmth, no question. But she said yes. That was enough. We met at a small cafe halfway between our home's neutral ground. Somewhere quiet, familiar, and public enough that neither of us would feel cornered. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting near the window, stirring her coffee, again and again, even though there was nothing left to mix. I recognized that movement now. It wasn't habit. It was nerves. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently as I approached. She looked up, forcing a small smile. "Hi, Mom." I sat down across from her, taking a moment to really look at her. There were deeper lines around her eyes than I remembered. Not from age, from strain. "How are you?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "I'm okay." The same answer. The same distance. I nodded slowly. Then I leaned forward just a little. "Emily," I said softly, "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I just want to understand what's going on." She didn't respond right away. Her eyes dropped to the table. "It's just been a lot," she said finally. I let the silence stretch, giving her space. "A lot how I asked." She exhaled, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Derek's under pressure," she said. "Things with his projects aren't going the way he expected." I nodded. "I've heard that," I said. "But that's not all, is it?" Her fingers tightened around her cup. For a moment I thought she might shut down completely, but then something in her expression shifted. Not fully. Not all at once. But enough. "He's been stressed," she said quietly. "And when he's stressed, he gets frustrated." Frustrated how, I asked gently. She hesitated. Then almost reluctantly, he just loses patience. Says things he doesn't mean. I held her gaze. "And last night I asked." Her eyes flickered. "That wasn't like him," she said quickly. But even as she said it, I saw the doubt. Small, but there. "Emily," I said softly, "throwing water in someone's face isn't frustration. It's disrespect." She didn't argue. She didn't defend him this time. She just looked away, and that told me more than any words could have. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over hers. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I said. "I'm asking you to be honest with me and with yourself." Her breath caught slightly. For a moment she said nothing. Then in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she said, "I don't feel in control anymore." The words hit me harder than anything else that day. I tightened my grip on her hand slightly. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "I don't really know what's happening with our finances," she admitted. "Derek handles everything. He says it's easier that way. Less stress for me." My chest tightened. "And are you comfortable with that?" I asked. She hesitated. "I was," she said. At first. That phrase again. But now I pressed gently. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes I ask questions and he says I'm overthinking, or that I don't understand how these things work." I felt a quiet anger rise inside me, but I kept my voice calm. "And do you believe that?" She looked at me, her eyes uncertain. I don't know what to believe anymore. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about control. It was about erosion. Slow. Consistent. Intentional. "Emily," I said carefully, "have you signed any documents recently? Anything related to loans, refinancing, business agreements?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Why?" "Just answer me," I said gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "A few things," she said. "Derek said they were standard." Just paperwork for some of his projects. My heart sank. Did you read them? I asked. I skimmed them, she admitted. He explained what they were for, and you trusted that explanation? She looked down. Yes. I took a slow breath. Emily, I said softly, I need you to think very carefully. Has Derek ever asked you to convince me to do something? Financially? Her reaction was immediate. She stiffened. Her eyes filled with something close to panic. Why are you asking me that? She whispered. Because I already know the answer, I thought. But I didn't say that. Instead, I waited, and after a long moment she exhaled shakily. He mentioned it, she said. My chest tightened. Mentioned what, that? Maybe you could sell your house, she said, her voice barely audible. And invest with us. Just temporarily, until things stabilized. There it was, out in the open, not just a suspicion anymore, a plan, carefully planted, carefully timed. I felt a wave of cold clarity wash over me. And how did you feel about that? I asked. She shook her head quickly. I didn't like it, she said. I told him it didn't feel right. And what did he say? Her voice dropped even lower. He said I was being emotional, that I didn't understand the opportunity. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, because now everything made sense. The repeated requests, the vague explanations, the pressure. It wasn't about small amounts of money, it was about positioning, about testing limits, about seeing how far he could push before someone said no. And if I hadn't started paying attention, if I had kept saying yes, he would have taken more, much more. I opened my eyes again and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. And what I saw wasn't weakness, it was someone who had been slowly worn down, piece by piece, until she no longer trusted her own instincts. I squeezed her hand gently. Emily. I said, my voice steady but firm. You're not overthinking. You're noticing something that doesn't feel right. Her eyes filled with tears. I feel like I'm failing, she whispered. No, I said softly. You're waking up. The words hung between us. Quiet. Powerful. And for the first time since we sat down, she didn't look away, because somewhere inside her, something was beginning to shift. And I knew then, the envelope I was preparing, it wasn't just for Derek. It was for her too, to show her the truth, to give her something she hadn't had in a long time, clarity, and a way out. By the time I got home that afternoon, I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew what I was dealing with, and more importantly, I knew what I had to do next. The conversation with Emily had confirmed everything Linda and I had uncovered. Derek wasn't just disorganized or overwhelmed. He was building something unstable, something hidden, and he had already started pulling Emily into it quietly, carefully, without giving her the full picture. And if I didn't step in now, it wouldn't stop. It would grow. That night I sat at my dining table again, the same place where I had organized my records the evening before. But this time, the folder didn't feel like something I was reviewing. It felt like something I was preparing to use. I opened it and went through everything once more, not to understand, but to refine. Every transaction was double-checked. Every note rewritten more clearly. Every date aligned with the timeline Linda and I had built. Because this wasn't going to be emotional. It wasn't going to be reactive. It was going to be precise. At around 7:30 p.m., I picked up my phone and called the next person I needed, Jonathan Hayes. He had been recommended to me years ago by a colleague, someone who described him as calm, thorough, and impossible to intimidate. At the time, I had saved his number just in case. I never imagined I would actually use it. He answered on the second ring. Hayes speaking. Mr. Hayes, I said, keeping my voice steady. My name is Sara Pierce. I was referred to you a while back, and I believe I may need legal guidance. There was no hesitation in his tone. Of course, Miss Pierce. How can I help? I took a breath and began. I explained the situation, not every emotional detail, but everything relevant. The financial assistance, the repeated requests, the inconsistencies, the documents, the conversation I had with Emily. He didn't interrupt, didn't react. He simply listened. When I finished, there was a brief pause. Then he said, You've done something very important already. I frowned slightly. What's that? You've documented everything, he replied. That gives us a strong starting point. Us. That word felt grounding. What exactly are we dealing with here? I asked. He chose his words carefully. Based on what you've described, he said, this appears to be a case of financial misrepresentation within a personal relationship. Possibly coercive, depending on how your daughter was involved. My chest tightened. Is it criminal? At this stage, he said it may not meet the threshold for criminal charges, but it absolutely raises civil concerns, especially if funds were requested under false pretenses or if your daughter was induced to sign documents without full understanding. Induced! The word sat heavily in my mind. So what can be done? I asked. There was no hesitation this time. We establish boundaries, he said. Clearly. Formally. In writing. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. And if he ignores those boundaries, then we escalate, he replied calmly. There was something about his tone, steady, unshaken, that made everything feel less chaotic, more structured, more controllable. I'd like to meet with you, he added. As soon as possible. Bring all your documentation. I can come tomorrow morning, I said. Good, he replied. We'll prepare something appropriate. After the call ended, I sat there for a long moment staring at my phone. Then I looked down at the folder. Everything was aligning now. The evidence, the support, the next step. The envelope I had mentioned to Derek wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming something tangible. The next morning, I arrived at Jonathan Hayes' office just before 9. It was located in a quiet building downtown. Nothing flashy, nothing intimidating. Just clean lines, neutral colors, and an atmosphere that felt intentional. He greeted me personally. Tall, composed, with a presence that didn't demand attention but held it naturally. Ms. Pierce, he said, offering his hand. Please come in. We sat down in his office and I placed the folder on his desk. He opened it immediately. For the next hour, he reviewed everything with the same kind of focus Linda had shown, but from a different angle. Where she saw patterns and numbers, he saw implications. Risk. Leverage. Exposure. This is thorough, he said, finally closing the folder gently. I tried to be, I replied. You succeeded, he said simply. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Here's what we're going to do, he continued. We're going to prepare a formal demand packet. I listened carefully. It will include a detailed summary of the financial assistance you've provided, he explained. A clear statement that no further funds will be extended. A request for repayment under specified terms. And a notice that any continued attempts to solicit funds under misrepresentation may result in legal action. Each word felt deliberate, measured. And my daughter? I asked. He nodded. "We will not accuse her of wrongdoing," he said. "But we will acknowledge the potential that she was not fully informed. That protects her position." Relief moved quietly through me. "Good," I said. He studied me for a moment. "You're handling this very well," he added. I gave a small, tired smile. "I've had time to think." He nodded. "There's one more thing," he said. I looked at him. "The way you deliver this matters," he continued. "You're not just presenting documents. You're establishing a boundary. It needs to be calm, controlled, undeniable." "I understand," I said. He slid a notepad toward himself and began outlining the structure. As he worked, I found myself thinking about something else. The letter. The part of the envelope that wouldn't come from legal language or structured arguments. The part that would come from me. "Can I include something personal?" I asked. He glanced up. "A letter," I clarified. "From me. Not legal. Just honest." He considered it for a moment. "Yes," he said. "As long as it doesn't contradict the formal notice. Sometimes clarity isn't just about facts. It's about meaning." Meaning. That word stayed with me. By the time I left his office, the framework was complete. The documents would be finalized by the end of the day. All that remained was the envelope itself. That evening, I sat at my dining table again. But this time there was no uncertainty, no hesitation. Just quiet, steady focus. I placed the documents inside a large, clean envelope. Then I took out a sheet of paper, and I began to write. Not in anger, not in accusation, but in truth. I wrote about respect, about trust, about the moment he mistook my silence for weakness. I wrote about Emily not as someone caught in the middle, but as someone who deserved better than being managed, dismissed, and used. And finally, I wrote something simple, direct, unavoidable. This is where it stops. When I finished, I read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it inside the envelope. I sealed it slowly, pressing the edge down with deliberate care. For a moment, I just sat there, my hand resting on top of it, because I understood something now. This envelope wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was consequence. Clear, measured, necessary. And when I finally stood up and carried it to the table near the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Not even satisfaction. Just certainty. Tomorrow morning. That's when I would hand it to him. And when I did, everything he had been hiding behind charm, confidence, and control would be laid out in front of him in a way he couldn't deny and couldn't escape. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind kept returning to one simple truth. There are moments in life when everything shifts. Not because something new begins, but because something false finally ends. And I knew without a doubt that the next morning would be one of those moments. I woke up just after 6. The house was quiet, still wrapped in that early morning stillness that makes everything feel suspended, like the world hasn't quite decided what kind of day it's going to be yet. I dressed simply, nothing dramatic. Nothing that would draw attention, because this wasn't about appearance. It was about presence. Before leaving, I walked over to the small table near the front door where I had placed the envelope the night before. I picked it up, held it in my hands for a moment. It felt heavier than it should have, not because of the paper inside, but because of what it represented. Clarity, boundaries, an end to something that should never have been allowed to continue this long. I took a slow breath, then walked out the door. The drive to Emily and Derek's house felt different from every other time I had made it. No hesitation, no second guessing, just a quiet, steady focus. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed Derek's car was already there. Of course it was. He liked to control the start of every day. I stepped out, walked up to the front door and rang the bell. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. The door opened. Derek stood there still in a pressed shirt, as if he had already been up for hours preparing for whatever version of the day he wanted to present to the world. For a moment, he just looked at me. Then a slow smile spread across his face.
"Well,"
he said, leaning casually against the doorframe.
"I didn't expect to see you this early."
His tone carried a hint of amusement.
Expectation.
Like he thought he already knew how this would go.
"I told you I'd be coming,"
I replied evenly. He shrugged slightly.
"I figured that was just
a moment," he said.
"You know, emotions running high."
I didn't respond to that. Instead, I held up the envelope. "I brought what I promised." His eyes flicked to it briefly, then back to me.
"And what exactly is that?" he asked.
"You'll see," I said calmly. There was a pause. Then he stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in.
"All right," he said. "Let's do this."
The house felt different from the night before. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I was seeing it clearly now. Emily was standing in the living room, her posture stiff, her eyes moving quickly between Derek and me. "Mom," she said softly.
"I'm not here to argue," I told her gently. "I'm here to finish something."
Derek closed the door behind me.
"Sounds serious,"
he said lightly. I walked past him into the living room and placed the envelope on the coffee table.
"Open it,"
I said. He raised an eyebrow.
"You're not going to explain first, no."
Another pause. Then with a small shrug, he picked it up. For a moment, he just held it like he was deciding how much attention it deserved. Then he tore it open. Casually, carelessly, at least at first. He pulled out the documents, flipping through the first few pages with a faint smirk.
"Let me guess," he said. "This is about last night."
I said nothing. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second, then the third. The smirk began to fade. His posture shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but enough.
"What is this?"
he asked, his tone sharper now.
"Keep reading," I said.
He did, slower this time. More carefully, I watched his face as it changed line by line, word by word. The confidence didn't disappear all at once. It cracked, gradually, subtly, until it wasn't there anymore.
"What the hell is this?"
he said again, louder now.
"It's a record,"
I replied, "of every dollar I've given you, every explanation you provided, every inconsistency that followed." Emily stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the papers. "Derek," she said quietly. He ignored her.
"This is ridiculous,"
he snapped.
"You're blowing things out of proportion."
I didn't react.
"Keep reading,"
I repeated. His jaw tightened. But he did. And when he reached the section outlining the formal demand, the repayment terms, the legal notice, the clear boundary being drawn, something in his expression shifted completely. Not confusion, not anger, recognition. He understood. "This is a threat," he said slowly.
"No,"
I replied calmly.
"It's a consequence."
The room went still. Emily looked between us, her breathing shallow. Derek let out a short, sharp laugh.
"You're actually serious,"
he said.
"You think you can just walk in here and intimidate me with paperwork?"
"I'm not trying to intimidate you," I said.
"I'm making something clear. And what's that?" that this stops now." The words landed with quiet force. He stared at me for a moment. Then he flipped to the last page. The letter. He hesitated for just a second before unfolding it. As he read, I watched his face again. This time the change was different, more subtle, more personal. Because this wasn't legal language. This was mine. When he finished, he lowered the paper slowly. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked. "The truth," I said. He scoffed, but there was less confidence in it now. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You've always had this outdated view of how things work." I met his eyes steadily. "No," I said. "I've just been patient longer than I should have been." Emily stepped forward. "Derek," she said, her voice trembling. "Is any of this true?" He turned to her quickly. "Of course not," he said. "This is exactly what I was talking about. She's trying to create doubt, to control the situation." But Emily didn't step back this time. She stayed where she was, looking at him. Really looking. "Then explain it," she said. There was a brief pause. Just a second, but it was enough. Because in that second, he didn't answer, and Emily saw it. The hesitation, the crack. The moment where his control slipped just enough to reveal what was underneath. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because this was no longer about me proving something. It was about him being unable to hide it. Finally, Derek exhaled sharply. "You're making this into something it's not," he said. "Everything I've done has been for us, for our future." "At whose expense?" I asked quietly. He didn't respond. Emily's voice was softer now. "But why didn't you tell me?" she asked. He turned back to her. "I didn't want you to worry," he said. "That's not an answer," she replied. The room fell silent again. Then Derek looked back at me, his eyes harder now, more defensive. "You think this changes anything he said?" I held his gaze. "Yes," I said simply. "It does." He shook his head, but there was something unsettled in the movement. "You don't get to walk in here and dictate how we live," he said. "I'm not dictating anything," I replied. "I'm removing myself from something that should never have involved me this way." I gestured lightly toward the papers. "You have the information," I continued. "You have the terms. What you do next is your choice." He stared at me for a long moment. Then finally, he said nothing. "And that silence said everything." Silence has a way of revealing more than words ever could. And in that living room, after Derek finished reading everything in that envelope, the silence became something heavy, undeniable. It stretched between us, tight, uncomfortable. And for the first time since I had known him, Derek didn't seem in control of it. Emily was the first to move. She stepped closer to him, her eyes fixed on his face, searching for something, an explanation, a denial, anything that might put the world back into a shape she could recognize. "Derek," she said quietly, "I need you to explain this." Her voice wasn't emotional, not angry, just clear. That alone was new. Derek exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You're taking this the wrong way," he said. Emily didn't react. "Then help me take it the right way," she replied. That stopped him. For a moment, he just looked at her like he was trying to decide which version of himself to use. The calm one, the persuasive one, the one that always worked. "This is business," he said finally. "It's complicated. There are moving parts you don't fully understand." Emily shook her head slightly. "Then explain them," she said. His jaw tightened. "It's not that simple." "No," she said, her voice still steady. "It is. Either the money went where you said it did, or it didn't." That landed harder than anything I could have said, because it stripped everything down to something he couldn't twist with language. Truth. Or not. He looked at her, then at me, then back at the papers in his hands. And for the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, pressure. Real pressure. "You don't understand how these deals work," he said again, but this time the confidence wasn't there. Emily didn't move. "Try me," she said. The room felt smaller, closer, like everything was tightening around the truth. Derek let out a breath slower this time. "Okay," he said. "Fine." He dropped the papers onto the table. Yes, things didn't go exactly as planned, he admitted. One of the projects fell through. The market shifted. It happens. Emily's eyes didn't leave his face, and the money she asked. It went into the project, he said quickly, to keep it alive. All of it, she pressed. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "No," he said. The word hung in the air, simple, final. And suddenly there was no more room for interpretation. Emily took a step back. "What do you mean, no?" she asked, her voice starting to shake now. Derek ran a hand over his face. "I had to move things around," he said, "to stabilize other areas. It's not unusual." "Other areas," she interrupted. "Yes," he snapped. "That's how this works, Emily." The sharpness in his voice made her flinch, but she didn't retreat. "What areas?" she asked again. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked away. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because for the first time, Emily wasn't just hearing his words. She was seeing what he wasn't saying. "Derek," she said slowly, "what else have you done?" There was no softness in her voice now. No hesitation. Just clarity. He turned back to her, his expression tightening. "I told you no," she said firmly. "You told me pieces. I want the whole thing." The room went still again. Then slowly something in Derek seemed to unravel. Not completely, but enough. "I was trying to fix it," he said, his voice lower now. "That's all. I just needed time to fix what she asked." He exhaled heavily. "The deal collapsed months ago," he admitted. The words hit like a quiet explosion. Emily's face went pale. "Months," she whispered. He nodded once. "I thought I could recover," he said. "Find another investor, shift things around." But it kept getting worse. And instead of telling me, she said slowly, "You kept asking my mother for money." "I was trying to protect you," he said quickly, "from what she asked." From this, he snapped, gesturing around him. From stress, from uncertainty, from the truth, she said. He didn't respond, because he couldn't, and we all knew it. Emily's breathing became uneven. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "And the documents?" she asked. "The ones I signed." Derek's expression hardened again just slightly. "They were standard," he said. "Just part of restructuring things." "That's not what I'm asking," she cut in. "What did I sign, Derek?" There was a long pause. Then reluctantly, some refinancing paperwork. On what she pressed. Another pause. "On the property." "What property?" He hesitated again, and this time the silence lasted longer, long enough that the answer became obvious before he said it. "Our house," he said finally. Emily staggered back slightly like the words had physical weight. "You used our house," she whispered. "I had to," he said. "It was the only way to keep things moving." "And I didn't know that she asked," I explained. "No," she said sharply. "You didn't." Her voice broke slightly on the last word, but she didn't stop. And the rest of it she asked. "The pressure you've been putting on me to talk to Mom, to get her to sell her house, was that part of your plan too?" Derek didn't answer. He didn't need to. Emily closed her eyes briefly, shaking her head. "You were going to use her," she said. "That's not fair," he snapped. "Isn't it?" she shot back. "Because that's exactly what it looks like." He stepped forward, his voice rising again. "I was trying to build something," he said. "For us. For our future." At her expense, I asked quietly. He turned toward me, frustration flashing across his face. "You wouldn't understand," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "I understand exactly what you did." The words landed cleanly, without anger, without emotion. And somehow that made them stronger. Emily looked at me then, really looked. And in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Recognition. Not just of what Derek had done, but of what she had been living inside. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek's expression shifted again, defensive, urgent. "I didn't lie," he insisted. "I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing she said." He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, it's not. I was managing the situation." "You were controlling it," she said. And there it was, the truth, spoken out loud. Derek stopped. For a moment he didn't argue, didn't deflect, didn't twist the words, because there was nothing left to twist. Everything was already out in the open. The money, the lies, the plan, the intention. And in that moment, something fundamental broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Emily straightened her shoulders slightly, her voice steadier now. "You didn't just fail financially," she said. "You betrayed me." He didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say, and for the first time since this began, he looked exactly like what he was. Not powerful, not in control, but exposed, and losing everything he thought he had secured. The moment Emily said the word betrayed, something in the room settled. Not peacefully, but definitively. There was no going back from that. Derek seemed to understand it too, because for the first time since I had known him, he didn't try to interrupt her. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't step in and redirect the conversation. He just stood there, quiet, watching her, as if he was realizing too late that the version of control he had relied on for so long no longer worked. Emily took a slow breath, steadying herself. "I need some space," she said finally. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't waver. Derek frowned slightly as if he hadn't expected that. "Emily, don't be dramatic," he said. "We can work this out." She shook her head. "No," she said. "Not right now." He stepped closer. "We're married," he said. "You don't just walk out because things get complicated." Her expression tightened. "I'm not walking out because things are complicated," she replied. "I'm walking out because you made decisions that affect my life without telling me the truth." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, because there was no argument that could undo that. Emily turned toward me. "Can I stay with you?" she asked. The question was simple,
but the weight behind it was not. I nodded immediately.
Of course.
Derek let out a sharp breath.
So that's it,
he said.
You're just going to leave?
Emily didn't look at him. I'm going to think, she said.
That's not what this is, he snapped. This is her.
He gestured toward me, getting in your head. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because Emily did.
No,
she said, turning back to him. This is me finally listening to my own. The words hit harder than anything else that morning, because they weren't about me. They were about her and the shift that had begun inside her. Derek stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Short. Bitter.
You think she understands what this takes, he said.
What it means to build something real? Emily didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him, quietly, decisively, and headed toward the hallway. I followed her at a distance, giving her space as she moved through the house, her house gathering what she needed, a bag, a few clothes, her phone charger, small things, but each one felt like a step, a movement away from something that had held her in place for far too long. When we returned to the living room, Derek was standing by the window, his back partially turned. He didn't look at us right away.
You're making a mistake, he said.
Emily adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Maybe she replied. But it's my mistake to make. That stopped him, because control only works when someone gives it permission. And she wasn't anymore. He turned then, his expression sharper, more urgent.
Do you have any idea what's at stake here? He asked.
Emily met his gaze. Yes, she said quietly. I do now. There was a pause. Then he tried something else. A different tone. Softer. He said, using the nickname he hadn't used all morning. I was trying to fix things. For us. Her eyes flickered just briefly, because part of her still wanted to believe that. I could see it. But then she shook her head. You don't fix things by hiding them, she said, and you don't protect someone by lying to them. He didn't respond, because again, there was nothing left to say. We walked to the door together. I opened it, stepping aside to let Emily go first. She hesitated for just a second on the threshold. Then she stepped out. And that was it. The line had been crossed. The decision made. Derek didn't follow us. He didn't call out. He just stood there as the door closed behind us, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked like a man who had lost control of the narrative. The drive back to my house was quiet. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window. I didn't try to fill the silence, because some things need space. When we arrived, she stepped inside, slowly looking around as if seeing the house differently than before. Safer, maybe, or just separate. You can take the guest room, I said gently. She nodded. Thank you. She set her bag down and walked in, then paused in the doorway. Mom, she said. Yes. She turned to look at me. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but the emotion behind them wasn't. I walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to apologize, I said. Yes, I do, she replied softly. I should have said something last night. I should have stopped him. I shook my head. You were in shock, I said, and you've been under pressure for a long time. She looked down. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad. She admitted that he was just stressed, that things would settle down. I nodded. That's what people do when they're trying to hold something together, I said. She exhaled slowly, but I knew something felt off, she added.
I just didn't trust myself enough to say it. I squeezed her shoulder gently. You do now, I said. She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, there was something steady in her eyes. Not certainty, not yet, but awareness. And that was where everything begins. The rest of the day passed quietly. She rested. I made tea. We spoke in small pieces, nothing overwhelming, nothing forced. But by evening the quiet shifted again. Because my phone rang, I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I answered. Hello, Mrs. Pierce, a man's voice said. Yes, this is Mark Ellison, he said. I believe we need to talk about Derek Carter. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. And why is that, I asked. There was a brief pause. Then he said something that made everything in the room feel colder. Because your daughter's name appears on documents she may not even know exist. I felt my chest tighten. What kind of documents, I asked. Financial ones, he replied. And based on what I've seen, this situation may be bigger than you think. I glanced toward the hallway where Emily's room was, then back at the floor. Then you'd better start explaining, I said, because whatever we thought we had uncovered so far, it was becoming very clear we hadn't seen all of it yet. Then you'd better start explaining. I didn't raise my voice when I said it. I didn't need to, because something in Mark Ellison's silence told me he understood exactly how serious this was. I'd prefer to meet in person, he said after a moment. This isn't something I should go over the phone. I glanced down the hallway again toward Emily's room. The door was closed. She's with me, I said carefully. If this involves her, you need to be clear. There was a pause. Then quietly, it does. My grip on the phone tightened. Then you have 10 minutes to explain enough for me to decide whether I should let this wait, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Mark exhaled. Derek's company, he said, wasn't just failing. It was already leveraged heavily before he started bringing in outside funds. Outside funds, I repeated. You mean mine? And possibly others, he said. The words landed hard. Possibly, I pressed. I don't have full visibility, he said, but I know he's been moving money between accounts tied to different projects. Some of them aren't stable. And my daughter, I asked. Where does she come into this? There was a hesitation. Then, he listed her as a secondary signer on at least 2 financial instruments. My heart skipped. What kind of instruments? Lines of credit. Possibly collateral agreements. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Without telling her, I can't confirm what he told her, Mark said carefully, but based on what I've seen, she wouldn't have understood the full scope. I opened my eyes again, steadying my voice. And why are you telling me this? Another pause. Then quieter this time, because things are about to collapse. And when they do, anyone attached to those documents could be pulled into it. A cold, steady clarity moved through me. Where can we meet? I asked. We arranged to meet the next morning at a small office space he rented downtown. When I ended the call, I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand. The situation wasn't just deeper than we thought. It was wider, more entangled. And Emily might already be standing inside something she didn't even see. I walked down the hallway and knocked gently on her door. Come in, she said softly. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in the clothes she had arrived in, her hands clasped tightly together. Who was on the phone, she asked. I sat down beside her. Someone who worked with Derek, I said. His name is Mark Ellison. Her expression shifted instantly. What did he say? I didn't soften it. I didn't delay.
Because we were past that now. He believes your name may be tied to financial documents you didn't fully understand, I said. Her face went pale. What kind of documents? She whispered. Lines of credit? Possibly collateral agreements? Her breath caught. I didn't. She started, then stopped. I didn't know that. I know, I said gently. She shook her head, her voice rising slightly. I signed things, but he told me they were routine. Just paperwork for projects. I believe you, I said firmly. She looked at me, her eyes filling with panic. What does this mean? She asked. It means we need more information, I replied, and we're going to get it. She stood up suddenly, pacing a few steps across the room. This can't be happening, she said. I didn't agree to any of this. I didn't, Emily, I said softly. Listen to me. She stopped, turning toward me. You didn't cause this, I continued, but we need to understand it clearly so we can protect you. Her breathing slowed slightly. How? She asked. We meet with him, I said. Tomorrow. We listen. We document everything. She hesitated. And Derek? I shook my head. Not yet. She nodded slowly. That night neither of us slept much. Not because we were afraid, but because everything was shifting again. The next morning we arrived at Mark's office just before 10. It was a small, functional space, nothing impressive, nothing polished. Just a desk, a few chairs, and stacks of files that suggested more work than success. Mark stood when we entered. Mid-40s, tired eyes, the kind of man who looked like he had been carrying something heavy for too long. Mrs. Pierce, he said. Emily. Emily gave a small nod. We sat down. He didn't waste time. I'm going to be direct, he said. Derek's situation is worse than he's telling anyone. I folded my hands in my lap. Start at the beginning, I said. He nodded. The initial project he mentioned, the one he said was delayed, that didn't just stall. It collapsed. Completely. Emily's hands tightened. When she asked. Months ago, Mark replied. Her face fell. And everything after that I asked. He tried to recover, Mark said. Took on new deals, moved money around, leveraged assets to stay afloat. Whose assets I pressed. Mark glanced at Emily. Yours? He said quietly. At least partially. She inhaled sharply. I didn't agree to that, she said. I know, he replied. But your name is on the documents. I felt a steady anger rise, but I kept my voice calm. Show us, I said. He reached into a folder and pulled out several documents, placing them on the table. We leaned forward. Emily's name was there. Clear. Undeniable. Her signature below it. But the terms were complex, layered, structured in a way that masked their true impact unless you knew exactly what to look for. He explained these, I asked. Emily shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. Not like this. Mark nodded. That's what I thought. The room went quiet. Then Emily looked up. Why are you telling us this? She asked. Mark hesitated. Then said, because I didn't sign up for this. I thought we were building something legitimate. But when I realized what he was doing, I stepped back. And now I asked. Now I'm making sure I'm not the only one who knows, he said. I nodded slowly. Thank you. We gathered the documents, not all of them, just enough. Enough to understand. Enough to act. As we stood to leave, Mark added one more thing. He's going to try to fix this, he said. Or at least make it look like he can. I met his gaze.
He already has, I said, and then we walked out. The drive back was different from the day before, not quieter, but clearer, because now there was no doubt, no confusion, just truth. When we pulled into my driveway, Emily didn't get out right away. She sat there staring ahead. I trusted him, she said softly. I reached over, placing my hand over hers. I know I said. She shook her head. I didn't just trust him. I defended him. I ignored things that didn't feel right. I squeezed her hand gently. That's what people do when they love someone, I said. She looked at me then, but love shouldn't feel like this, she said. No, I agreed. It shouldn't. She took a deep breath. Then slowly, something in her posture changed. Her shoulders straightened. Her expression steadied. What do we do now? She asked. I held her gaze. Now, I said calmly, we make sure this ends the right way, because whatever Derek had built, it wasn't just falling apart anymore. It was about to be exposed. And this time, there would be no one left to hide behind. By the time we walked back into my house that afternoon, everything felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. There's a certain kind of calm that comes when uncertainty disappears, not because things are resolved, but because you finally understand what you're facing. And that's where we were now. No more guessing, no more second guessing, just truth. Emily set her bag down by the door and stood there for a moment, looking around like she was seeing the space in a new way, safer, more solid. Or maybe just honest. I need to fix this, she said quietly. I walked past her into the kitchen, setting the documents carefully on the table. We will, I replied, but not all at once. She followed me, her movements slower now, more deliberate. What does that even look like? She asked. Where do we start? I turned to face her. We start by protecting you, I said. Legally, financially, emotionally. She nodded, though I could see the weight of it settling in. And Derek? She asked. I paused for a moment before answering. Derek will deal with the consequences of his choices, I said calmly. But right now, our focus is you. That didn't fully satisfy her. I could tell, because for years her life had been shaped around his decisions, his reactions, his expectations. Stepping out of that pattern wasn't going to feel natural. Not yet. Is he going to try to contact me? She asked. Yes, I said simply. She exhaled slowly. He already has, she admitted, pulling her phone out of her pocket. Messages, calls, emails. Have you responded? She shook her head. No. Good, I said. She looked at me. It doesn't feel good, she said. I know, I replied gently. But it's necessary. We sat down at the table together, the documents spread out between us. For the next hour, we went through them again, not as investigators this time, but as people reclaiming control. I explained what Linda had found, what Jonathan had outlined, what Mark had confirmed, not in overwhelming detail, just enough for her to understand the structure of what had been done, and more importantly, what it meant for her. So I'm not responsible for all of this, she asked at one point, her voice small but hopeful. Not in the way he intended, I said. But your name being on those documents means we need to act carefully. She nodded slowly. Okay. That word carried more strength than anything else she had said that day, because it meant she was no longer avoiding the truth. She was facing it. That evening we called Jonathan together. He spoke to Emily, directly explaining her position in clear, calm terms.
You may have been listed as a signer, he said, but if it can be demonstrated that you were not fully informed, your liability can be challenged.
Emily listened carefully, asking questions, clarifying details, and with each answer I could see her confidence returning piece by piece. Not all at once, but enough. After the call ended, she sat back in her chair, exhaling deeply.
I wish I had asked more questions, she said. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You're asking them now, I said.
She looked at me. And that's enough.
It's where everything begins, I replied. The next few days were quiet, but not passive.
We filed initial notices, froze access to shared accounts where possible, documented everything. And through it all, Derek continued to reach out.
At first, the messages were apologetic.
I made mistakes. We can fix this. I just need a chance to explain. Then when those went unanswered, the tone shifted. You're overreacting. This is being blown out of proportion. She's manipulating you. Emily read them, but she didn't respond. Not once. And that more than anything else marked the shift, because silence this time wasn't avoidance, it was boundary. A week later, Derek requested a formal meeting, through Jonathan, not directly, which told me everything I needed to know. He was adjusting, adapting, trying to regain control in a different way. We agreed to meet, not at his house, not at mine, but at Jonathan's office. Neutral ground, structured, clear. The day of the meeting, Emily was quiet in the car, not withdrawn, focused.
You don't have to say anything you're not ready to say,
I told her. She nodded. I know. We walked into the office together. Jonathan greeted us with his usual calm professionalism. Derek was already there, sitting at the table. He looked different. Not in a dramatic way, but enough. Less polished. More tense. He stood when we entered. Emily, he said. She didn't respond. She simply took her seat. I sat beside her. Jonathan sat across from Derek. And the meeting began. Derek spoke first. He admitted to poor decisions, mismanagement, a lack of transparency, carefully chosen phrases, controlled, but stripped of the confidence he once carried. Jonathan responded with facts, clear, direct, unemotional. The documents, the transfers, the discrepancies. There was no room for interpretation, only acknowledgement. Eventually, the conversation turned to resolution. A repayment structure, a timeline, conditions. Derek agreed, not because he wanted to, but because he had no leverage left, and he knew it. Then came the final piece. Emily. Jonathan turned to her. Is there anything you'd like to add? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Derek. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with clarity. You didn't just lose money, she said. You lost trust. He didn't respond. Because again, there was nothing left to say. The meeting ended shortly after. The paperwork would take time. The legal process would unfold. But the structure was in place. The outcome set. When we walked out of the office, the air felt different. Not lighter, but freer. Emily took a deep breath. It's really over, she said. I looked at her. Yes, I said. It is, she nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time. She looked like herself again. Not completely, not fully healed, but no longer lost. And that was everything. It's a strange thing how a single moment can divide your life into before and after. For me, that moment wasn't when Derek threw the water. It wasn't even when I handed him the envelope. It was quieter than that. It was the moment I realized I no longer needed him to understand what he had done in order to move forward. Because clarity doesn't always come from someone else admitting the truth. Sometimes it comes from you deciding you've seen enough. The weeks that followed the meeting were steady, structured, and in their own way healing. Not easy, but honest. Derek followed the terms of the agreement, partly, I suspect, because he had no other choice. The repayment plan was formalized, monitored, and legally binding. His tone and communication shifted entirely. Gone was the confidence, the charm, the carefully managed control. What remained was compliance and distance. Emily filed for divorce 2 weeks after that meeting, not impulsively, not emotionally, but with the same quiet certainty she had begun to rebuild within herself. "I need a clean break," she told me one evening as we sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting familiar shadows on the walls. I nodded. "I understand." She looked at me, her expression steady. "I don't hate him," she said. "That's not required," I replied gently. "But I can't trust him," she added, and that more than anything else was the truth that mattered. Trust once broken in that way doesn't return simply because someone apologizes. It doesn't rebuild itself through explanations or promises. It requires something Derek no longer had to offer: time, and consistency, and honesty. Things he had already spent. The legal process moved forward slowly, as these things always do. There were documents, signatures, meetings, each one another step towards something final. But life quietly began to reshape itself around us. Emily started therapy. At first, she was hesitant. "I don't even know where to begin," she admitted. "Just begin where you are," I told her. And she did. Little by little, she started to untangle things she hadn't even realized had been knotted inside her, the way she had learned to second-guess herself, the way she had dismissed her own instincts, the way she had confused compromise with surrender. I watched her change, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. She started laughing again, genuinely, not carefully. She spoke more openly, more directly. And perhaps most importantly, she began to trust her own voice again. As for me, I found myself reflecting more than I had in years, not on what I had lost, but on what I had almost allowed to continue. Because that's the part people don't talk about enough. It's not just the harm someone else causes. It's the harm we tolerate in the name of peace. The silence we keep in the name of love. The boundaries we fail to draw because we're afraid of what might happen if we do. I had spent months, maybe longer, convincing myself that patience was the right response. That understanding would eventually fix things. That giving more would somehow create balance. But the truth is, some situations don't need more patience. They need clarity. They need limits. They need an ending. One afternoon, a few months later, I found myself standing in my study looking at the drawer where I had kept the envelope. The same drawer where I had once stored uncertainty, doubt, hesitation. Now inside it was something different. The empty envelope. I had kept it, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. I picked it up, running my fingers lightly over its surface. It looked ordinary, plain. But I knew what it had held, not just documents, not just a letter, but a decision. A moment where I chose not to stay silent, not to accommodate, not to allow something wrong to continue simply because it was uncomfortable to confront. Emily walked into the room just then. "What are you doing?" she asked. I held up the envelope slightly. "Remembering," I said. She smiled softly. That day changed everything, she said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. It did. She stepped closer, leaning lightly against the doorframe. I used to think strength looked loud, she said, like standing up in the moment, fighting back, saying something dramatic. I smiled faintly. And now, she glanced at the envelope. Now I think it looks more like what you did, she said. Quiet, thoughtful, certain. I looked at her. That kind of strength doesn't come quickly, I said. It comes from knowing what matters and what doesn't. She nodded, and from knowing when to stop trying to fix something that was never yours to fix. I set the envelope back in the drawer and closed it gently. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? I hadn't fixed Derek. I hadn't changed him. I had simply removed myself and my daughter from the space where his choices could continue to harm us. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can do. Life didn't return to what it had been before. It became something new, something quieter, stronger. Emily eventually found her own place again, not far from me. Close enough for coffee in the mornings, long walks in the evenings, and conversations that no longer felt strained or careful. Our relationship in some ways became deeper than it had ever been. Not because we avoided difficult things, but because we faced them. Together. And Derek. He faded into the background of our lives. Not forgotten, but no longer central. Just a chapter. A lesson. A line that had been drawn and not crossed again. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not reacting differently that night. If I wish I had said more, done more, fought back in the moment. And my answer is always the same. No, because that moment wasn't about winning an argument. It was about choosing the right response. And the right response didn't happen at that table. It happened the next morning. When I handed him that envelope, not as revenge, not as punishment, but as truth, clear, unavoidable, final. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this: respect isn't something you ask for, it's something you require. And when someone shows you clearly, unmistakably that they don't intend to give it, you don't argue, you don't beg, you don't wait, you prepare, and then you act. There are moments in life when we're taught to stay quiet for the sake of peace. Especially as women, especially as mothers, we're told that holding a family together sometimes means enduring discomfort, overlooking disrespect, and giving more than we receive. But this story isn't about endurance. It's about awareness. Because there's a difference between loving someone and losing yourself for them. What happened to me and to Emily is something many people experience in quieter ways. Emotional control, financial manipulation, subtle erosion of confidence. It doesn't always look dramatic at first. It often looks like compromised patience or just getting through a difficult time. Until one day it doesn't. And that's when a choice appears. You can continue explaining it away, or you can see it for what it is. The moment Derek threw that glass of water, it wasn't just an act of disrespect. It was a moment of revelation. It showed exactly what he believed, that I would stay silent, that I would accept it, that I would continue to support a system that was quietly hurting both me and my daughter. But strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. It gathers truth. And then it draws a line that cannot be crossed again. If you've ever been in a situation where something didn't feel right, but you told yourself to be patient, to be understanding, to give it more time, I want you to know this. Your instincts matter. Your boundaries matter. And it is never too late to choose clarity over comfort. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.
Have you ever experienced a moment where you realized something wasn't what it seemed? How did you handle it? Leave a comment below and share where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like this aren't just about drama. They're about truth, growth, and finding your way back to yourself.